I have an aspiration to live in a way and so that my heart never closes off to anyone ever under any circumstances. And that's a real aspiration. I take it seriously. And of course, I have many opportunities to see where there's plenty of work, that still needs to be done. And because these conditioned patterns in us, they run deep. And so we have to take the long-term view. And sometimes it can feel, frustrating, and I remember once I don't know, years ago, I just kind of got frustrated at myself. I don't view myself as having particularly a lot of ill will in my mind, but I'm not immune, from ill will any more than anyone else. And I wasn't living in this perfect world, perfect love. And I decided, all right, that does it. I'm just not going there in my mind anymore. I'm just going to live in love. And well, that didn't help that much, and it didn't take long for it. The difficulties come back. Um, so we can have these good intentions, but we see that it's more about the intention we bring rather than how much we judge our minds to be good or bad or wholesome or unwholesome or pure or defiled or whatever words we like to use. That's not what's so important. It's what do we do with whatever arises. And so when difficulties arise, states of mind that can be challenging arise, it's like, can we have the awareness to recognize it and then the tools to work with it and to learn how to let go or keep the heart open. And I'll read you this. Here's a quote from Goenka. Many of you know who Goenka was. He died just a few years ago. And his quote, he said, which I think I love this quote, is very simple and beautiful. He says, real wisdom is recognizing and accepting that every experience is impermanent. This is getting back to the insights into impermanence, right? So real wisdom is recognizing and accepting that every experience is impermanent. With this insight, you will not be overwhelmed by ups and downs. And when you are able to maintain an inner balance, you can choose to act in ways that will create happiness for you and for others. Living each moment happily with an equanimous mind, you will surely progress toward the ultimate goal of liberation from all suffering. So I love that quote, and it's lovely. And when I hear that, I think, wow, that sounds great. I'm signed up for that, and it sounds so simple. But then again, then it's in the doing, and we see that we come to recognize and have to really hold with the proper discernment or wisdom that we're all a mix of wholesome and unwholesome, right? And it's nothing wrong. It's just what it is to be a human being. And so here, we come on retreat, and we're in daily life practice too, but here we're in the retreat context. And we may have all these good intentions, and maybe we really say, like Goenka, we say, okay, don't cling, and it sounds so simple. And then we realize that we can't do it. We can do it in a given moment, but all it takes is the proper causes and conditions to come together, and we're caught right back again. And so we have to know that this is just how it is. And in fact, as we're meditating, we see this is happening all the time, that we have, good and pleasant experiences, we have difficulties, and you can't stop it. It just keeps rolling along like this. And so really what we're doing here is trying to strengthen the conditions or the qualities in our hearts and minds, right? This is what we always talk about: the concentration, the insight, the mindfulness, the heart qualities, and build them. We take a special time. We carve this time out of our normal life so we can focus just on this. And then the idea is that that can really help us to actualize our good intentions more and more. And so, in the Buddhist world, there's a lot of emphasis on suffering, and some people, it's a mistake, but it's a common misconception that people think the Buddha said life is suffering. That was the second characteristic, dukkha. And that's inaccurate, because when you're experiencing happiness or pleasure, that's not suffering. Where's the suffering there? But so that's not what the Dharma is pointing to, but it's pointing to this way to translate that word dukkha that I mentioned the other day, which was unreliable because of impermanence. That's the whole idea, and we suffer when we cling. And we really don't need, actually, the Buddha to tell us about suffering. We're all experts at suffering, and we know all about it, every one of us. What we're not so expert is what to do. And that's really what we're trying to explore on this retreat. And so on this talk, I want to explore especially working around difficulties. What is common on retreats, I mentioned this the other day, where is that you can, the first day or two can oftentimes be especially challenging. That's not always true. And so typically, most retreat centers, on the first night, there's a talk, takes many forms, but it's generally called the hindrance talk, because these difficulties, we call them hindrances, tend to arise. And when the teachers are planning behind the scenes, they're going to say, okay, who's going to give the hindrance talk? And somebody will do it, whatever. And so that's generally because people spend the first day, you show up on retreat, and of course the advertisement for the retreat says something like, come meditate, find inner peace, inner happiness, inner bliss, something like that. And then we're often shocked, if we told you what actually happened on retreats, nobody would show up. And so, so we hopefully it's not that bad, but sometimes people are shocked that they sit to meditate and they remove external distractions, and then you're just there with your own mind, and so much stuff that had been maybe you were aware of, or maybe not. Sometimes things were covered over by the busyness of life, can come roaring up. Doesn't have to, but it can be like this. And so, and then we're shocked and we struggle and we're fighting against ourselves, and we don't know how to hold what's happening with the right view. So I want to talk about, this really is, I guess you'd say, a version of the hindrance talk. And I may say something at the end, if there's time, about the traditional list of the 5 hindrances. Maybe it's good to know that. I'll try to bring that in. But I want to give just what I think are a few tips in general with working with any situation, but in particular around difficulties. So the first thing is, we put a lot of emphasis on mindfulness. And I think that's so critical, because it really is in some meditation, it's the whole practice, but here we certainly consider it to be foundational. If there really is any possibility for freedom or liberation in any of the ways we mean it, it hinges on mindfulness. We could say wakefulness, knowing what's happening. I had defined mindfulness the other day. I gave my own definition of just not being on automatic pilot. And what happens when you've lost your mindfulness and you're caught up, you're on automatic pilot, right? You respond in any situation. It's just a habitual reactive response. When you have your mindfulness, you know what's happening, and it creates a space, you could say, between what happens and how you respond to what happens. At least gives the potential of some space. Sometimes what's going on is it's too much, right? And it's too strong. And so it'll still catch us, even if we know. So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But at least we have the chance to make a choice. And, bringing that mindful, I'll just give you an example. I remember there's been times in my life, I'm married and been married for almost 30 years. I've, good marriage, but like in any relationship, you have the parts that work well, you have the difficulties and the challenges. It's a mix. And I remember times getting, something happened and I'm annoyed and why did that? And I'm going to tell her and I'm right. And doesn't she know I'm right? And doesn't she know whatever? I want to let her know. And then I'll think, well, wait a minute. Why don't I wait a little while and before I say anything? I don't have to lose it. I can always choose to come back later. Let myself just settle down. See, the mindfulness is giving me some choice, even though the irritation maybe had arisen in my mind, but I can still bring some wisdom on how I want to respond. But it was based on not just having a habitual reaction, but actually being able to know what's happening. Oh, she did this. Oh, here's the response I'm having. Oh, let me remember my aspiration. What was my big aspiration? To live in a way where my heart never closed off for anyone. That includes if someone's annoying me. Oh, I got to do it for that too. Yes, it includes that too. Okay, let me make a choice. Let me just hang out here a little. When I'm settled down, then I can go and say whatever I need to say. And many times, whatever I had to say was just, you just let it go and you move on. Maybe not, but I'm just saying that's an example, a simple example of how mindfulness gives us so much. It's so empowering to support us to live in the way that, that's more in tune with our good intentions and our aspirations. And so sometimes it's true, and you know this, that mindfulness alone is enough. Just by shining the light of awareness and knowing what's happening is enough. It kind of, I don't know what you would say, it self-liberates. It just lets go. But there are many times when the mindfulness is not enough alone. And then using our mindfulness, we need to bring in some other skillful means. And so I want to talk about what are some various skillful means. I'll offer a few that I found have been helpful for me. You may have your own things has worked well for you. I think one of the things that's very important is recognizing that some experiences are just too much for us. And I started to talk on that just a few moments ago when I was talking about how even when we're mindful, just that may not suffice to make the most wise and skillful choice of action. It may be that we're not able to find the balance or equanimity with something. It's just way, way too much for us. And it's not even close. And this can happen in a lot of things. Maybe you're sitting in meditation and, maybe you're sitting in some posture, cross leg on whatever, and, you have knee pain. Sometimes it can serve us well to stay with that knee pain and not be so quick to immediately shift or move away. And maybe we hang out there a little bit and we come to know, well, how am I in relationship to pain? It's like a training to learn, can we bringing mindfulness to pain doesn't mean it's all of a sudden becomes blissful and pleasant. Unpleasant is still unpleasant, but our relationship with it can shift and we can learn how to bring some equanimity or presence or sense of allowing and letting be, right? And we just learn, no, I can be with this. So that can be very powerful. But if it gets too strong or if our resources get worn down, so we don't have our inner strength to meet it, it can be too much. And then sometimes we can fall into hanging in too long when really we weren't. We should have just out of kindness to ourselves stretched out your knee or shifted your posture. And we hang in too long. The longest I've ever meditated has been 3 hours. I've done it a bunch of times over time. Usually in the retreat context, I would do that. And I remember the first time I was a new meditator and I meditated 3 hours and I was having a good retreat and I thought, well, I'm going to keep, the bell rang and I'm going to keep sitting. And I sat through the walking period and said, okay. And I was sitting cross-legged and I've been doing it a lot of years. So even way back then, my hips and knees, and my joints were pretty stretched out. So I could sit for an hour and just really not have much pain at all. It was okay. I could do it. So I thought, okay, I think I'm going to keep going. And then I thought, and then the next walking period came. So 2:45 is about an hour and a half, and that was getting achy, but I could be with it, So I thought, well, I'll sit one more through the next sit, because I'm in the sit and I didn't want to get up in the middle of the sit in the hall. So I had some like peer pressure to stay, and that kind of helped me. By the time I got to 2 hours, it hurt. I was in a lot of pain, I thought, but I didn't want to move. And then by the time the bell rang, I think that had been 2 hours and 15 minutes, 3 45-minute sections. And then this shows you how defiled my mind was. I only had 45 minutes to go, and I was going to get 3 hours. And I think I may have even thought, this is talked about having a defiled mind, I'm going to bag 3 hours. And I mean, what's that? So I could walk around and say I sat for 3 hours? I mean, it was silly. And I did it. I made it through 3 hours. But for that last time, I was just toughing it out. And it felt like, I was getting stabbed in the knee. It was really painful. But, I just kind of, but I wasn't working with it. It was just buffeting me around all over the place. I wasn't getting any benefit out of it. I was just overwhelmed with the pain. So what's the point of that? So times like that, we want to have the discernment to know what's going on. First of all, it would have been nice if I had enough discernment to see the defilement in my mind that wanted to just have an ego thing to say I sat for 3 hours. I mean, come on. But I didn't see it. It was just in it, right? So, okay, I saw what I could see. And I should have had the wisdom to know, am I able to, first of all, you don't want to damage your knee. I don't think I did, but, people have done that, they should have not sat so long. And secondly, I needed to know that, am I really able to work with this? What is serving me in the bigger purpose more? So recognizing that some things are too much for us is really important. And especially because in our scene, so many times I've heard teachers say, whatever's going on, it doesn't matter. They just say, well, just be with it. Just be mindful of it. And the answer is not, I don't know if you've ever heard this from anyone else, but so I'm just going to give you my take on it. The answer is most definitely not always be with it. Sometimes the answer, if you have a choice, sometimes we don't, is to bring it down or get away from it. We need that also. Sometimes if you have whatever's going on, maybe we have body pain, and not so easy to get away from it. We need a lot of compassion there, right? Because when something's too much for us, we either need to find some way to bring the intensity down into the realm for which we could work, or we need to be able to bring up our inner resources to meet it. And if you can't do any one of those two, that really is a lot of suffering. And that's when we need to have really talk about empathy, compassion for ourselves. And we all have situations like that in life, whether difficulties in the body or just our life circumstances, something going on with another person, or our finances, or our living situation, or our work, or it could be many, many things that we aren't able to make this go away. I'm reminded of a time when I was many years ago, we were backpacking up in the out of the Mammoth Lakes area, and on this several day backpacking trip. We were a couple of days packed in out in the middle of nowhere, and had our food in these bear cans, so the bear can't get them. But normally you don't want to put the bear can right outside your tent, which is what we did. So in the middle of the night, my wife wakes me up and she goes, Richard, it's a bear. Bear was right outside the tent, growling, getting into the, now I know that this isn't grizzly country. The bear's not afraid of us. It's not going to bother us. And it just wanted the food. And we should have put it, 100 feet, 100 yards away or whatever. We didn't. And she said, it's the bear. What should we do? I said, Well, we could either get out of the tent and bang some pots and pans together to try to scare it away, or we could lie here in our sleeping bags, quivering like a leaf. I vote for lying in the sleeping bag, quivering like a leaf. And then I guess some adrenaline kicked in or something, because I've never had the experience. People talk about shaking like a leaf. My body, I've never had this happen since either. It started just shaking like this much. That's how much the fear was. It was so unpleasant. And I was just thinking, please go away, end this. But I couldn't. So I know what it's like to be in some, I've had other suffering in my life, but this is one that popped in my mind. And then my wife said, let's send metta to the bear. And so we were saying, may you be happy. I'd rather have a happy bear than a mad bear, right? May you be happy. But really, the words were, may you be happy. But what I was really saying, go away, Mr. Bear, go away. That's what I want. I just needed this gone. It was so unpleasant. So what do we do when something's difficult like that and it's hard to be with? Well, maybe our task then is really, life's calling on us to find some way to be with our suffering. Maybe that's all we can do in those times. And then in those times, there's nothing really to say. We do the best we can when it's like that. We do the best we can. So in those times, we have to recognize those and be very respectful of those times. And they're hard for sure. I think it's going to be hard for all of us. But many times we do have some choices. And so it's not always just be with things. Sometimes the answer is, if you can change it, change it. Bring down the intensity. We need to have that in our toolkit. That's what we need sometimes. So we recognize it's not just a one approach, depending on what's going on. And that's not just in daily life, but in our meditation practice. We need to be attuned moment by moment, where not only what is happening, but how am I being with this? Could I really be with this? And one of the, sometimes something's difficult and we move away from it, move our body, and we could have stayed with it and worked with it. And okay, we missed an opportunity. Fine. It's not that big of a deal. It's going to happen many times. Sometimes, it's just right. We didn't judge it right. Other times we're not going to get it right in the other direction. We really should have kind of moved your knee or whatever, and we hung in there too long. And okay, we suffered unnecessarily. So, but this is part of our learning process. And I think all of us will have some of this to some degree, but just keeping in mind the idea that it's actually okay to try and change your situation. As a matter of fact, it's important to be able to do that. So that's one thing. Another thing, don't judge your practice. Where I'm going to focus not just all of life, but I guess it applies to any life, but I'm thinking here as our meditation. Try not to judge it by how pleasant or unpleasant it is. And I know that can be hard to do, okay? But look, if we're real honest, first of all, there's no such thing as a bad sit. That's literally true. There's just what's happening. So when you were concentrating, it was all going well, and now you're restless and sleepy and you're full of anger, and it feels like it all fell apart. It didn't fall apart. Really, it didn't. It's just changed from what it was then. And now the empty, impermanent flow of experience looks like this. Due to causes and conditions, the energy just sank. Maybe you need to get up and move a little, right? But if we're honest with ourselves, we all know what a good sit is. We all know what a bad sit is, right? If we're really honest, yeah. I can remember so many sits where I'd be in the meditation hall and I was just in a beautiful place and the bell would ring and I would think, I think I'll just stay with this for a while. This wasn't like trying to go for 3 hours, but just maybe another 15 minutes, stay with it, because it was just so good, the place. And that was fine. I don't know if I've had that many places when the bell rings and I'm suffering. And I thought, I'll just stay with this for a few more minutes. No, usually it's like, thank God, get me out of here. And matter of fact, let me, just one moment, I'm gonna lean over and grab my bell. Have you ever been, it's a rhetorical question, I know the answer for all of us. Have you ever been meditating? You're suffering. When's that bell gonna ring? You're suffering something, and then you hear this sound. And the mind just goes, ah, and you're suffering, let's go. You haven't even moved. Nothing changed, just the sound arose. That really goes to show how much of your suffering in that moment was just caused by your mind. Right? So the whole trick of the practice, this might be the whole Dharma, is how to do that without having someone walk around behind you 24 hours a day going like that to get your mind to do it. You've got to learn to do it on your own. That's the whole Dharma practice, right? I'm being trying to be a little light or humorous about it, but actually when you think about it, it's learning to shift our relationship with what's happening and not getting so caught up in whether it's to our liking or not. I don't know if you ever totally get past that, but we can go far. This is the equanimity, and it's shifting the relationship so our well-being and happiness is not only about what the quality of the experience is, it's more how am I relating with whatever's happening. That's a liberation because it's less dependent on circumstances, or we'd say causes and conditions. It's more of an unconditioned kind of happiness. So that's one of the things that we can get there by, when we learn not to judge our practice so much by how pleasant or unpleasant it is, right? So just a few more things. It is important to, it just goes back to what I was saying, that, we talk about conditional and unconditional happiness. I think everything's conditioned as long as we're alive, but we're shifting conditions so that we stop spinning out. We're less entangled from things. And one of the things that gets talked about is this idea of, when we find this balance, it's this idea of being dispassionate, right? Because that's a way, sometimes you'll hear that word about being dispassionate. And I think it's a fine word, but it means, another word you'll hear is to become disenchanted. This is traditional language. But if you think about what those words really mean, in everyday usage, to be disenchanted kind of has the feeling of being, well, what is it? It means kind of let down. I think that's a connotation. I'm kind of disenchanted, I'm let down. But actually, what is the word disenchanted? It means to no longer be enchanted. Well, what is it to be enchanted? Think of the old fairy tales, the evil wizard casts a spell and you're enchanted. You're in some altered reality. You're disconnected from reality. And, these fairy tales, they have a happy ending. The spell is broken. You're no longer enchanted. You're disenchanted. You're back to seeing clearly how things really are. That's what we're talking about. And so one of the things in the term disenchanted is we do start to learn and really get it, not just as a concept, the idea that seeking our happiness solely and just chasing after getting what we want and avoiding what we don't want. If you remember, I read a quote from Hari Das the other day. Actually, some of you may not have gotten that, so I won't read the whole quote, but let me see if I can find that here. It's worth repeating. Actually, I've got a different quote here I'm going to read you. Sorry, one moment, please. I wasn't prepared, but this struck me as something that might hang in with me for a moment, please. Here. This is a quote from the first great Taoist master, Lao Tzu. The second one, my Chinese pronunciation is terrible, Zhuang Tzu, second great Taoist master. The quote is, "I cannot tell if what the world considers happiness is happiness or not. All I know is that when I consider the way they go about attaining it, I see them carried away, headlong, grim and obsessed in the general onrush of the human herd, unable to stop themselves or to change direction. All the while they claim to be just on the point of attaining happiness." So this idea of becoming disenchanted, disenchantment, we're no longer enchanted. It's actually not a letdown. Really means if we're not enchanted, we can see things clearly. And so it means that has a number of meanings. One way to see things clearly is when we're in a reactive stance. In that moment, we're not seeing because it's colored by our reactive emotions and moods, and we don't even necessarily see all the stories we're creating about something. I used to do a lot of prison Dharma work. I actually started back in the early and mid 1970s. There was a project called the Prison Ashram Project. Bo Lazoff, Ram Dass were part of it. And I was living in a yoga ashram, and we went into San Quentin prison to teach meditation. I was a young guy, I didn't know much, but, we went in and tried to be helpful. And I remember that was back when San Quentin was a level 4 prison. Now it's got a death row, but it's mostly a level 2. It's not quite as intense. And I remember talking to more than once, people would say over the years in different prisons, I don't do that work anymore, but I ended up getting in a fight because someone walked past and happened to look. And that person, when they got the look, thought, well, this person who just gave me the look is disrespecting me, and gets up and they get in a fight. Talk about being enchanted, not seeing clearly. And I remember talking to someone else, and they says, I don't even remember looking at the guy. I'm walking around. Maybe I happened to glance over. Maybe there happened to be some look on my face, but I wasn't doing anything. But this guy made a story. He didn't even realize, to him it was real. This guy is giving me attitude, and I have to get up and be strong, and they're in a fight. So that'd be an example of where we don't even see the overlay and the meaning we put on experience. That's an example of seeing more clearly. That's why having more of a concentrated mind, a clear and steady mind, starts to see these subtler patterns that we may not have noticed. So this gets into an example of, again, the insight type practices are important, but even just the fact of having a steadier samadhi, concentrated mind, we naturally become more aware of these things that we may not have we just notice them. So that's kind of the idea of becoming disenchanted, right? Can help us. Another aspect of the word disenchantment is that we see, this was the Hari Das quote, I won't read it again, but how much of our time is, we talk about how we want to, nobody here is trying to have more experiences that you don't want in your life and less of what you do want, right? I mean, it's kind of silly to say it, and we can kind of laugh about that, but there's something kind of poignant there, because if our whole strategy is spent just trying to arrange everything so that we maximize, we say pleasant, but just everything's right and none of the bad stuff's going to happen, that's hard to do, and it's stressful, and man, just a lot of work. So we want to take care of ourselves. This is the part I've already mentioned. We want to change our circumstances. We want to take care of ourselves. Of course we do. And that takes many forms and goes to many levels. But after we're finished doing our part to arrange life how we want it to be, then at the end of the day, you get what you get. And so the question is, what are you going to do with you get what you get? That really is our question. So you don't have to stop trying, but then what do you do with what you actually get? Because I've found many times things happen in life, and it's like take my body, the body. It just goes right along its business, and it just doesn't ask my opinion. And I want to tell you, I do everything right. I eat organic vegetables. I meditate, stress reduction. I don't smoke or drink. I'm not judging anybody. I'm just saying, those. And I really exercise. I'm getting older. I exercise more and more. I do all the right things. Some days I just get out of bed and something just hurts for no apparent reason. And I'm slowing down. I won't. Some of you are older than me. I'm not going to get much sympathy, but some of you are younger. But I'm not meaning as a complaint. I do complain some. I'll admit it. But really, the body's teaching me. It's a teacher. And it's saying, nothing's going wrong. This is just what happens. It's just what our body does by its own causes and conditions. And so then when I can learn to be in a harmonious relationship, then when I see that, I look in the mirror and I see this old guy looking back at me, rather than, oh my God, what happened? Who's that old guy? Is that really me? Where'd my youth go? Instead of that, it's much better to just, I don't have to make a thing. I look in the mirror. Okay, I need to shave. I do whatever I do. I go about my business. We can be much more at peace and happiness. This is the non-clinging impermanence and resting in the equanimity that Goenka was talking about. So this is this idea of how the disenchantment, becoming disenchanted with the old ways. And this is the whole thing about refuges also, finding maybe a new way to maybe have a chance to have some degree more of peace and happiness, right? So that's kind of the one word you'll hear a lot, disenchantment. There's another one related, dispassion, become dispassionate. So we're more equanimous and dispassionate. Well, that word also, the word dispassion, can have the connotation of being kind of cold and untouched. I think it can have that connotation. What does it mean to be dispassionate, not caught in the passions? Well, what is it when you're caught in the passions? When you're caught in a lot of passion, we also don't see so clearly. I mean, anybody who's ever been in love, I know some of you may have, some of you may not have. I have in my younger days, and I've had that experience. It's not that great. It's very unsettled. And not only that, when you're in the passions, but I'm trying to be a little humorous, but maybe there's some truth here. All the little things that you find endearing, once that all settles out to longer term, now they become annoyances. Maybe they don't have to come, but you get my point. We see things with a different perspective because we can see more clearly. We're not jerked around by the passions. In fact, when we're not being buffeted around by the passions, most people find that they actually experience the experience of their life more clearly and fully. You're not disconnected, you can be more connected, because when you actually just be present and get really up close and intimate with what's happening. Remember, our practice is not a disconnecting practice. It can be that way, and we need to work with it. It's a connecting practice. Most of us, you don't have to, you can meditate with your eyes open, but most of us sit, get in some posture, we close our eyes, we bring our attention inward, and then we strengthen the powerful samadhi awareness. it's turned into our own mind and body process. That's a profoundly connecting practice. So we're not disconnecting, we're not cold and aloof, but we want to be clear and see things as they are. That's really what it's all about. So these ideas of we can really help us learning to be present. And when we learn to be present, one of the things that happened for me, I remember when this happened for the first time. I was on a very long retreat. I did, like many of you, I've done all kinds of retreats, but this was a 1 year long retreat, and that's a long time. And I was mostly just practicing in my room, and it didn't really come out that much. I mean, when I get lonely, I do walking meditation in the dining hall when no one was there. But and one of the things you find when even on shorter retreats, you can tough it out for a short retreat. Few days, you can sort of push through. You can't tough it out for a long retreat. The power on that retreat was not the meditative states. You do get all that stuff too, and it's amazing, and it was just very positive for sure. But the real power was that unless you decide to go home and leave, if you're going to stay, it forces you to let go into all the ups and downs and you can even be deep in it. And it can be beautiful and transcendent. The next day you're in your despair. And you have to just let go, and you see it's just all arising and passing away on its own. There's ups, there's downs, and none of it stays. Have you ever had now I have to be careful. I'm about to ask, I'll ask you the question, and I'll tell you why I started to pull back. I was going to say, have you ever had an experience that didn't change? It all changes. I realized when I said that, it was too late, because I don't know, people deal with chronic situations, and nothing's permanent, but that feels pretty permanent. So I want to be very respectful, and I hope I didn't trigger anyone if you have chronic pain in the body. So maybe that question wasn't appropriate for you. It's like maybe that your answer in your mind was, well, in fact, Richard, yes, I am having something that's not changing. I've got this pain in my body for 15 years. It's not going away. So maybe that, I hope I didn't trigger anyone off, or long-term depression or something like that. So yes, so that may not be the right question for you. But that's why I wanted to pull it back, but it was too late. It was out. One of the shifts on that long retreat that happened, I can remember when it struck me. I was walking in the dining hall when I'd felt lonely, and I went out there. And it's interesting because I had this very strong samadhi. And sometimes the samadhi was so strong, and the mind was just in this beautiful, clear place and not a lot of agitation. But other times the samadhi would be clear, but then all the stuff of the mind would come roaring through. But I was more connected with the foundational support of what was underneath it. And I remember watching the storm clouds of my mind come through, and it struck me that I was just as interested in my suffering as I was in my bliss. And that was really, when I realized that, it just opened me up into this it shifted the suffering, because I was so in such just to realize that it could be that way, that we can get, and this is the training, we learn more and more to hold a wider and wider range of experiences with balance and clarity. And it doesn't mean we don't have an edge, but the edge expands. And an example I've often used, some of you heard me say this, but I like the image so much. I have this image of, there's a circle, and then you're in the center of the circle, and then however big the circle is around you, it contains, from where you are out to the edge, is the level of intensity of your experiences for which you can really be with, and not get, and still bring in some balance and equanimity and presence. And if it gets too strong, or if it's of such a quality, it's outside your circle, then that's when it goes back to being too much. Not we should be able to be with it. There's not a should. It's just beyond really. It's too much. And there's lots of experiences. It's not hard to imagine, or even have experiences that are just too much for us. right? So it can be like that. And the way I think about it is that all these practices we're doing are just expanding out our circle to contain an ever widening or more and more of all the experiences of our life to hold with the same balance. And I don't know, I haven't reached a place for myself where there's no edge. But I would say, I'm sure it's true for, I know many Dharma practitioners feel this way. And I'm sure for many of you, it gets better. We can find that equanimous balance, and that stream of non-clinging carries through more and more for us in our life. The stream of wakefulness, you can use all these adjectives: stream of wakefulness, stream of samadhi. You could say stream of love. It manifests in a lot of ways, but there's something that carries through as a lived awareness that becomes more and more alive. And that can carry through. So not only does that help widen our circle, but it even carries through, again, I know many of you know this, to meet the places that are outside our edge more. And we have that ally come in with us that we've cultivated, that clear, aware presence. It is one way people will say it. Or sometimes it's the stream of non-clinging, or the stream of metta. There's lots of things. And in a way, I think they're kind of the same. I can't really tell, but sometimes it feels like just the pure awareness and consciousness is kind of not so different from love, but that's a whole, well, that may not get off in a different direction there. So, and it comes to help us. And it also comes back to help us, going back to the first thing I said, which is that if we had any choice, possibility for freedom, it hinged on mindfulness. I need to kind of qualify that now, because I do think there's a lot of truth there, but actually, as the Dharma actually becomes more alive, not as a good idea, but the actual, real, palpable, lived experience that's carrying through more. And I talked the other day how our set point changes. We can get to a place where there's actually no difference between daily life and retreat practice. I don't know if you've experienced that, but that really can happen. And it can carry through like that. And so when that's carrying through, even the times if you first of all, you don't lose your mindfulness as much, because like I'm being on retreat, right? You're kind of in it, and it carries more. When you do lose it, you're not as deeply lost or for as long. But even the times when you're on automatic pilot, those good qualities, that stream of Dharma is still there flowing. And actually your habitual unconscious reactive response comes from a better place. Even if you don't have and some of you, I'm sure many of you know that, even if you don't feel like you're being that mindful, you're just habitual reactive. It's a good response. Maybe it's a pretty equanimous response more of the time. So these things come to us, and the bottom line for all of what I'm trying to get to is we have to show, I guess one way I like to think about it is if we can let go of our own agenda about things more and just open to how things actually are. Again, I'm not talking about in daily life and in the ways where we have to take care of our business and do things. And of course we have our opinions, and we're not going to stop that. But I'm talking about in the ways just how we respond to so much in our lives. If we can set aside and just stay open and ask the question, maybe like, what's actually happening here? And we need all these tools we're developing, so we're better at remembering to ask the question, and then we're better at being able to discern the answer. And then we let that inform what's needed. And then we don't have to have some, I'm going to do this kind of practice or that kind of practice, or it should be like that. It's just what's happening. And really, don't you want what's happening is what's happening, whether we like it or not, right? I mean, that's kind of nonsensical, but right? So if you don't like it, it doesn't matter. It's still what's happening. So wouldn't you prefer to actually then be able to meet that in the most skillful and effective way. I think to do that, we mostly need to get out of this reactive, this enchantment, right? So we're disenchanted in the way I mean, dispassionate in the way, and have an equanimity and presence and mindfulness and the clarity, that's kind of the samadhi, this clear mind. And then to really assess the best we can up to the limit of where our experience has led us, to then go, oh, what would be most skillful? And if we don't know, we have to be we have to be confident enough to make a choice. Say, well, I don't really know right now. It's not clear to me. You have to choose something, and so you just choose. It's okay. And if you mess it up, it happens, right? And you'll learn if we're open to learning, right? And the feedback comes up to us. The author E.L. Doctorow has a quote which I love about writing a novel, but I substituted in for Dharma practice, or I could say living life. He said writing a novel, but I'm saying life is like driving a car at night. You can only see as far as the headlights, but you can complete the entire journey. It could be a 1,000-mile journey that way. And I really think that's the good news, because you don't have to see more than you can see. I mean, if you did, we could never make any progress, right? You just show up with all the resources you've got, whatever it is. And whatever you judge that to be, if you think, oh yeah, but you don't understand, Richard, I'm too this or not enough that, no. We often judge by how well or poorly we show up and think we're doing it. But look, if you could do it better, you would. This is what it looks like when you're doing your best. Maybe that's a good news, bad things. It depends on the tone of voice. I could say, you're doing your best and it looks like this. Or I could say, you're doing your best. It looks like this. You get the difference? And you really are doing your best, because if you think, but you don't understand, like I want to have a daily life meditation practice, and I just get pulled off by so many things. If you could stop getting pulled off, you would. I'm not saying give up trying, but first start recognizing those are real forces that are, this is what's going on. You don't have to beat yourself up. These are powerful forces that pull me in these different directions. See, the judgment is out of it. We don't have to tear ourselves down. We can hold ourselves and be kind to ourselves. It's hard to meditate when these forces are pulling me, and I'm really trying. Yeah, it's like you would talk to a good friend. You wouldn't beat them up. You wouldn't say, well, God, you're pathetic. You'll never meditate. You're saying, I know it's hard. Well, just do the best you can. That's what we tell ourselves, if you can remember. This is the self-kindness and compassion that comes in, and it undercuts a lot of the suffering we can generate. We not only suffer less, but we move forward faster because the stress can let go, and the ease and relaxation can be more in. And we're open to learning even from our failures and our weaknesses. So it's actually, to me, I share that with you because for me, I love that expression. I'm doing the best I can. It looks like this. And I don't mean that it's an excuse to blow things off. No. It's also okay to say, you could do better too. We can add that in too if we hold it in the right perspective. But these are powerful forces that can pull us here, and we have to be respectful of it. It affects all of us, and we can't see our blind spots. It's okay. So by bringing the best we can, it does move us forward, right? And another thing, just to end, that we see that the things that we're aiming for, the wholesome qualities that we want to strengthen, it's not that far away, because we already have the most important thing that's the most of essence, and that's the good intention. I put a lot of emphasis here on intention. I'm sure you hear a lot of other people do it. I hope you do too. It's our deep, you could say, aspirations, our deepest wish, desire, you could say our deepest intentions for who we want to be, how we want to live, how we want to show up in life. And sometimes they're not conscious, but they're still forces that affect us. Everyone here already has just amazing, good, beautiful part of you. We're a mix. We're all a mix of wholesome and unwholesome, of course. But that deep goodness is already there. That's the foundational part you need. And then everything else, that's the part we're working on. Strengthening the parts where we actualize it more and more. That's all. So I say all of this at the end because I named a few things, not judging your experience by how pleasant it is, trying to bring really like the Suzuki Roshi idea of beginner's mind, but also this, which I'll end in just a moment by, some of you may know that or some of you may not. I like the attitude he talks about, but also just really I'm trying to get this idea of the same kindness that you would show someone you just loved and care about. We do the best we can to bring that kindness to ourselves. I know for some of us, we can be so hard on ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with you. There's a lot, you have a lot of company if you've got a mind that can be really tough on you. But to end, I'll do the Suzuki Roshi, but I just want to give you this one thought. I'm going to talk, for those of you who have a difficult mind, I don't know if it's open to listening to this, but I'm going to just offer this piece up. The critical mind is, it is personal because you're experiencing it, but it's impersonal. It's just a little program that's in there that runs. And it's sort of like, when you come and sit on your whatever device, you're here right now on this Zoom online retreat. You saw some icon and you clicked on it, right? When you click on that Zoom icon, assuming your computer's working, what's it going to do every time? Zoom is going to come up. It only knows how to do one thing. It's going to bring up this application. You're never going to get Google Docs or an Excel spreadsheet. It's never going to do that when you click on the Zoom icon. And so the little programs that we all have versions of these, but if you have the critical mind, the things that trigger off, it's like clicking the little icon in your mind. And it does the only thing it knows how to do. And the critical mind, by the way, it doesn't care. It'll land on you, it'll land on someone else. It doesn't care. It's just doing what it does. So we feel it, it's uncomfortable, but we don't have to believe it. So the next time your critical mind kicks in, you could try what I'll just suggest that you can pat it on the head, thank it for sharing, and then you can tell it, okay, you can go sit over here now, and I'm going to carry on with my business. We don't have to become entangled in it. It's hard, I know. But we hold it with wisdom. Even the critical mind, we don't have to believe because we see more clearly for what it is, right? The self-critical mind can sometimes prevent us from feeling our own goodness because it's easy to point out everything that's wrong with us. And look, it's easy to find everything that's wrong with any one of us. You want to come hang out with me? It's not hard to find my faults. We're human beings. So the critical mind is like, so what that it tells what's wrong? We already know. It's okay. It doesn't take away from the goodness of your intention. It just doesn't. And that's more powerful. And it's more foundational for you. It gets covered over and we lose touch with it, but it's still working even subconsciously. So hopefully I just say all that so we can suffer less and just know we're doing our best in the good way. And then we can carry on. So I hope that's been useful. Those were some thoughts I've had to share about just working with difficulties, not only some techniques, but the attitude that I hope we can hold ourselves with of self-love. And the final thing is, you may know Suzuki Roshi. He was the founder he was a Japanese Soto Zen teacher, founder of the San Francisco Zen Center, and I think Green Gulch, it was connected. And Tassajara and all that whole scene. And he had his book, which has got to still be in print. It's so classic, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And one of the things he talks about is, there's a quote, this is a very Zen feeling kind of thing, but you'll get the idea. He said, in the mind of the beginner, there are many possibilities. In the mind of the expert, there are few. And I love that attitude. Of course, he's not talking about really having expertise, like, if you need to go to the doctor, you want them to have expertise. That's not what he talks about. But he's talking about as we go through a lot of our lives and think we know how it is. And this idea of bringing beginner's mind is just it's kind of the same thing of what I was talking about before, of seeing instead of the unconscious or sometimes conscious overlay of our views and opinions and stories, and we create a reality. We just let the experience with the thing be there as it is, and not make it in ways we don't even realize we're doing. That's the idea of beginner's mind. So I thought I would just offer that to you. So I appreciate your kind attention. I hope this has been useful for you. And if not, parts are, you just let those parts go.